As you know, every programming language has got a set of reserved words associated with it, which preferably I'm calling it as keywords. There are certain rules that are associated with the programming language again, which will help us define something called identifiers. So in this session, we are briefly going to discuss about what keywords are and what identifiers are and how are they different from each other from Python programming language perspective. So keywords are the ones that are basically going to help us build the syntax and structure of the Python programming language as a whole. So keywords again are reserved words that has got certain special meaning associated to the interpreter here. So depending on the programming language that you are working on, keywords has got specific meaning associated to the respective compiler or interpreter, depending on the programming language. Since we are talking about Python, so all the reserved words which we are calling it as keywords has got some special meaning associated with the interpreter. Okay. So keywords again cannot be used as identifier names. So we have not yet covered about what identifiers are. Before we get into all of that, let's import this specific built-in module called keyword. So keyword here is a built-in module. I'm currently unaware of what this module has got to offer us. Completely unaware of it. So I'm going to make use of this particular function called dir. This function dir is going to help me explore the contents of this module. The contents of these modules could either be attributes, it could either be functions or methods, it could also be classes sometimes, it could also be list objects sometimes, could be anything. All of these dunder methods, so I'm calling the highlighted attributes as, or probably highlighted methods as dunder methods. I'm calling it as dunder basically because it has got a double underscore before and after. We can make use of all of these dunder methods, which are special methods in performing operator overloading and other activities. We are not discussing about what these special methods are. We might be able to discuss about the dunder methods maybe in the later sessions, but not now. We are going to pay more attention to what these functions are, what these lists are, what these attributes are that are associated with this particular module, built-in module called keyword here. Okay. So let me investigate what each keyword is. I can always make use of this module called keyword and reference this is keyword. So is keyword, as we know, is a built-in function or method. So the type of it, you can always check for type specifically and look at the type of it. The type of it is going to be built-in function or method. Provide a question mark and hit Control Enter. It's going to provide the doc string of it. From the doc string, I understand that I can provide a valid word, which could be a keyword, which could be a potential keyword. Try and understand if this is a valid keyword or not. So this always checks for validity of the word, validity of keyword probably, right? So else here is a valid keyword and hence it returns true. Let me provide some nonsensical word, probably some word like UDF or something, user defined. So this is not a keyword as I know, right? So it should return false now. It's going to return a false now. So this is always checking if a particular identifier, I'm calling it as an identifier now because this is user defined name. We are just looking at if a user defined name, if it's part of keyword or not by making use of this function called is keyword here. I believe you have understood on how we are going to make use of this is keyword in order to understand if an identifier or a user defined name is going to be a keyword or not, because we're not supposed to use keywords as user defined names. We cannot create a variable name by using a keyword name. So before we get into identifiers and what variables are, let's actually look at the list of keywords here. So keyword.kwlist is going to provide us with the list of keywords that Python is going to offer us. So I'm going to print all of this in order to represent this output horizontally instead of vertically so that I'm able to see all the contents in one go. So all of these keywords, all of these reserved words I can say are having certain special meaning associated with it. If you are looking at this or is used for logical conditioning. Again, this has got certain special meaning associated with it. If here has got a special meaning associated with it. So it's going to evaluate a specific conditional expression that we are going to provide. And if this is turning out to be true, you are running specific statements that are present within this block. Otherwise, you're not running any of the statements that are defined within this particular block. So if is a keyword now which is defining the syntax and structure of your program. So all these keywords that you are currently observing, defines the syntax and structure of Python programming as a whole. That's the whole purpose of discussing about keywords here. So keywords are the ones that is going to help us write code. So I can also check the length of the total number of keywords that I'm currently observing. I'm currently running on Python version 3.8.13. So for this version, I observe that there are 36 different keywords. For a different version, there could be different number of keywords that are associated. So it always depends upon what is the Python version that you are running on. Mostly all these keywords would remain same, right? This version of Python is being installed in the virtual environment that I'm currently pointing to. So venv is a virtual environment that I have installed as a kernel spec, and I have pointed to that particular kernel. I'm running this whole code. So obviously it's going to point to the Python version that I have defined while creating that virtual environment called venv. Okay, we all have looked at the sequence of steps that we are supposed to follow for creating a virtual environment and mapping that virtual environment as a kernel spec and use that as a kernel within your Jupyter notebook. Okay, we all have done that. Good. So we have pretty much understood what keywords are and how we define keywords, or what are the different keywords that are available for the respective Python version that we are currently looking at, and how are we going to investigate the different contents of this particular built-in module called keyword, and how are we going to check the length of the number of keywords that we are observing. So len is going to help us check the length of it, which is a built-in function. So this is a built-in function. Just like print. Print again is also a built-in function. So whereas keyword was a built-in module. So I'm going to provide a link which is an index page for the list of built-in functions as well as built-in modules that come along with the Python standard installation. So you can reference that particular documentation in order to understand what are the different built-in functions that you can leverage while writing Python code for various problems that you're trying to solve. Also look at what are the different built-in modules that Python standard library would offer us. Okay. So now let's look at what identifiers are. Identifiers, as I mentioned to you earlier, are nothing but the user defined names. So UDF that I have defined earlier, right? UDF that I have defined earlier is a user defined name. So this is a string type variable that I have just now created, right? If you look at the type of this particular identifier name, it's going to be a string. So an identifier could be a variable. It could be a variable, it could be a class, it could be a method name, or it could be a function name, or it could be anything. It could be any one of these. So here I'm just trying to create a variable called UDF, which holds this value, which holds this string value called as user defined name. And even when I check the type of this particular variable name or identifier name, I observe that the type of it is string. Okay. There are certain rules while naming these variable names, or while naming these classes, or while naming these methods or functions. So what are the different rules? The first thing is you cannot define a variable name or an identifier name to be one of the keyword names. So you always get a syntax error. So we are getting a syntax error because else cannot be a user defined name because it's already a part of keyword. So whatever is part of keyword, let's say that I'm using this finally, just randomly picked up one of the keywords there, running this code, I get the same error again. Invalid syntax. You cannot have a user defined name, or you cannot have an identifier name, which is a keyword, which is part of the list of keywords here. Okay, that's the primary aspect of it. There are other rules like you cannot start off this particular identifier name with a digit. You cannot have a digit. You cannot have a digit at the beginning, but rather you can have a digit at somewhere in between, right? It's totally fine to have, but you cannot start off an identifier name with a digit like this. Okay. You can also not have a white space in between. You cannot have some special characters in between. You cannot have any special characters in between. So this is a comment, right? You cannot have any special characters like this. Exclamation here indicates that we are running a command, but we're not supposed to provide that. Let's say that we are having a dollar sign here. And this again provides us a syntax error because this is not a valid identifier name. So you always need to check for all of these rules while defining or while naming the identifiers here. The identifier name could be a variable, could be a class, could be a method, could be anything. Could be anything that we have discussed so far. Okay. Now, once we have understood on how we define the identifiers, what are the different rules that one needs to follow while creating the identifiers, it's also very important for us to learn what is the different styling methods that programmers generally use. Let's say that I am creating something called UDF underscore name, a variable with UDF underscore name. So this styling is called a snake case. So this is snake case. There are certain programmers, like probably for other programming languages, people tend to use camel case, where they do not separate these words with underscores, but rather they have this init cap for the subsequent word, which itself is a differentiator. And we call this type of naming for your identifiers as camel case. So this is camel case and this is snake case. So we preferably tend to use snake case for most of the naming conventions that we use across Python programming. Most of them use snake case. It's not that we cannot use, or we should not use camel case for naming conventions. We still can go about using them. But it's a general practice that people tend to do their naming conventions by using snake case. There are other rules that you can go through. Like for instance, identifiers are case sensitive, which we have not dealt with. Let's say that UDF with init cap is one of the identifiers that I am now creating, or probably I'll define this as name. I can call this as username. Okay. So now I can print out this particular variable name, and this is a valid variable that I have created. And this does not exist. This variable name without init cap does not exist because this is case sensitive. I have not defined this identifier at all. I have defined an identifier called name with init cap. And I have not defined any identifier without init cap here. So please understand the difference here. It's always case sensitive. The identifier naming process is always case sensitive. So we have also looked at other different rules that we need to follow while defining an identifier. In fact, we have tried to define some of these rules, and then we have looked at certain errors that popped up. Okay. I would recommend you to redo this again. Just do some practice on your own and try and understand what could be the different keywords and how you go about defining different identifiers, and possibly looking at inspecting the type of different identifiers that you create, so as to understand what type of identifiers are you creating depending on what value you are supplying to it, and so on. Right? That's all in this particular session, and thanks for watching.